This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. Now, today's maze, we really would love for you to be able to avoid it, but many of us can't because we're drawn to the turns and the tweaks of life, and we keep hoping that we are the strong ones who can change it. My guest today is Debbie Griffiths, and I am so glad that I ran across a post from one of my podcast buddies, and I read the post and I said, Debbie would make a great guest on Avoid the Maze. So many of us don't really understand domestic violence, and we live with it too long. And as you're going to hear from Debbie, I'm going to just ask her in a second to tell her story. I'm going to try not to interrupt her because her story is so common. So first of all, Debbie, welcome to Avoid the Maze. And tell us how this all came about.
Good morning, Karen, and thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. For me, I just finished writing a book, got it published. It's called Torched, Burnt by a Gaslighter. And it's really a story of two women, different ages, different backgrounds that happened to meet in a park. One woman is older and she's gone through the gaslighting and the domestic abuse and has moved on with her life, and she's happy. And the other one is much younger, more like her daughter's age, and is suspecting that things aren't right at home. And so the two women strike up a conversation, they strike up a friendship, and there's a little bit of drama in there, mixed in between. But it's really to show the various red flags and how they impact families and how they impact the victim. And the red flags are very, very subtle. Like I said, it took me 5 weeks to write something that was 25 years in the making. It
Wow.
happened to me many, many years ago. It's a lot to come back from. It's a lot to heal. But the good news is you can leave, you can rebuild your life, and you can be happy. So that's my ultimate goal, is to share that message.
It's interesting because you say this happened over a 25-year period. Something obviously kept you in that situation for 25 years. I was in a situation for 7 years, but if you would ask my ex-husband, who we have come to terms with things over the years, and we're copacetic. I won't say we're best friends, but we understand. We were young. We married for all the wrong reasons, but the best reason we had is we have a son together who is absolutely wonderful. But I used to hear things constantly like, you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid. And they were
You
just
can't cook right.
yeah. And it was just part of regular conversation. And I know in the beginning, I thought, am I imagining this? I had low self-esteem to begin with, so this didn't help it. So how did it start with you?
Well, I was young and I thought that I had met the love of my life. I'm a cradle Catholic, so the word divorce was never in the vocabulary. And you married for life, and I treasure that vow, and I still do to this day. It is part of my core value. But so many times, you're dealing with narcissistic personalities, and they have a way of kind of like love bombing you, telling you all the good things. Oh, where have you been all my life? And I can't live without you. And they just shower you with all of these compliments and stuff. And especially it rings more true to people with maybe a little bit lower self-esteems, or they're young, they're naive, and haven't had some of the experiences of the world, so to speak. So it feels good because, at the end of the day, our basic human need is to love and to be loved. So when someone is paying attention to you, it feels good,
Right.
and especially when you're younger and you've got hormones and stuff like that, it just all kind of escalates. So yes, I quickly fell in love with him, and then they'll shower you with the stuff, and then all of a sudden the criticisms kind of come in, like you just said, well, why did you wear that today? Or, and after I got married, is like, the things with cooking and stuff, simple things like making meals. The other thing that happened to me was isolation.
Mm.
And eventually, through the course of the years, was more and more isolated from my family, really couldn't have any friendships. If I tried to strike up a friend, a conversation with the neighbors, like, well, don't get too close, don't do any, um, he'd find fault. It's very easy to find fault with somebody, very
Sure.
critical. And so the isolation, and I didn't really realize it, it's because there could be times when things are fine, and then all of a sudden, the pattern of criticisms would escalate, and then all of a sudden it'd be fine, and then the love bombing comes again. And so it's like this pattern of up and down and up and down. And after many years, you lose yourself, and you
Absolutely.
really don't know who you are or what you're thinking, and or what your perception of reality has become so skewed. And what happened to me, how I figured it out, is one day I'm in the grocery store, and I see a one of the National Women's magazines, on the counter, and it had a recipe, that looked good, and missed the fact that there was an article from a woman about verbal abuse. So I brought the magazine home, happened to see that, on the cover, and like, that's not for me. I was just like looking at the recipe. And a couple days later, I picked up the magazine, actually read the article, and it struck me because one of the things she said is, when my husband would come home, I would get my stomach would kind of flip. And it reminded me back to the day I got married, when I was on my dad's arm and we were entering the church, and my stomach flipped. And my dad leaned over and he said, "You don't have to go through with this if you don't want to." Well, when you've got 200 pairs of eyes on you, and the money that and the planning and all that stuff, I I just chalked it up to wedding jitters. And so, obviously went through with it and stuff. But that statement, your stomach flip, resonated with me because that I it triggered that memory. And so my ex at the time, he was working, he was traveling. So he'd leave on a Monday, come back on a Friday. And, the one Friday, he opens up the garage door. I could hear it open, and my stomach flipped. And I went, no, no, no. So I kind of ignored it. Well, it happened a couple more times. And to the point where it's like, okay, what's happening? And at that point, I called my mom because it really wasn't, I didn't really have the opportunity to call very, very much, or she would call and check in more. And I said, Mom, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm not happy. And she said, her response was, I have been praying for this call for many years.
Oh my.
And I
Yes.
said, what are you, what? That took me totally by surprise. And she said, we've always suspected he's been controlling, but we just didn't know to what extent. And at this time, she still didn't even know some of the other stuff that had happened, through the years. And so I started seeking help. That's where I learned about codependency. And, but at the same time, things were escalating because I started speaking up about me not being happy, and it was my fault. And so he put a lot more pressure on me, and then I became very depressed. I had pneumonia, there was some other issues. So between the physical and the emotional, I was
Sure.
spiraling downhill fast, and the medicine that the doctor prescribed couldn't keep up fast enough, basically. And so, I attempted suicide. I felt at that time that was the only way I could escape this. And I have 3 kids. One was the youngest was 4, the oldest was 10. There were, or no, I'm sorry, 14. There's 10 years age difference. And, I thought that my kids would be better off with me if I can't even get out of bed, if I can't even exist, everybody would be better. Why am I here? And I was spiraling big time, and so I attempted suicide, and I woke up in the psych ward, and the doctor came in and he said these words, "Your environment is making you sick." And it was enough for me to realize, because I still had 24 or 48 hours left in the psych ward because you have the 72-hour
Right.
stay, and that's when I realized I needed to make some decisions. And I realized it's like, what is it? What kind of mother do I want to be for my kids? What kind of woman do I want to show them especially to my daughter, what they can be? I did not. I wanted the abuse to stop. It needed to stop with me. I didn't want them to be victims, nor did I want them to learn to victimize others. So I made that decision to leave. His parting words to me were, "You will never make it and no one will ever love you," which was at that point the wrong thing to say to me. And over the course of many years, it's a process of healing and raising kids. And there was parental alienation on top of all this because of the age of the kids. So I was still dealing with a lot, but it was a slow process. It was moving forward. I might have taken 2 steps forward and maybe a step back,
Sure.
but the progress was still forward. I obviously found a career that I've done very well with. And, when I realized, actually, when I wrote the book and I brought up those words, and it's like, wait a minute, why have I let those words about no one loving me hold me back? That's not love, So writing the book was very therapeutic, at the end of the day. So, and my goal is really to help somebody else. If it took a magazine article for me to wake up, I'm hoping someone reads this book and sees some of the red flags and say, wait a minute, maybe this is happening to me, and I can get out. Because I thought for a while with kids is like, because I was a stay-at-home mom, really wasn't allowed to work. And it's like, how am I gonna make it? How am I gonna feed kids? How am I gonna find a place? How can, all of this negative self-talk
Right.
starts, coming into your mind. And then, I realized once I made that decision, it was very liberating. And, the plans came into place, and it's like I knew this was the right decision. So
As I'm listening to your story, and I'm hoping our listeners um, can pick out the pieces, but you
yes.
talked about walking down the aisle with your father. Um, I was sobbing walking down the aisle with my father. And I remember before they opened the doors, um, I said to my dad, I'm making a mistake. Now, my
Oh,
parents were
wow.
not happy with the person I was marrying, um, but they sort of understood, how I gravitated to him.
Hmm.
Um, the families didn't get along, so that was a bad omen.
Yep.
But my father didn't tell me I could get out of it. He said, "All those people are waiting for us."
Oh, wow.
He later in life apologized for that. Um, and I went through it and I went through the motions and um, very much like you, I heard things, but I kept thinking, well, that must be my fault. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I went to the grocery store and I spent $1 more than I was supposed to spend. And it was like, and I never thought about those things while I was in it. It was much later in life. In fact, my husband today, we've been together 39 years.
Good for
Um,
you.
and I still have those flashbacks. So I want our listeners to know that you can heal,
Yes.
but there's still those memories. And every once in a while, my husband, and he's been saying these things for 39 plus years, he'll say something to me and I will get mad because I've heard it differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was almost a lifetime ago. So for all of you out there, there are good people, okay? As I said to Debbie, that over the years, and especially in the last maybe 10, 15 years, my ex and I have come to an agreement that we don't want to hate each other. You know, we share a son together. Um, and we got married for all the wrong reasons. And now that we can both look back at that, and we both have been in solid marriages now for 39 years, um, it's like, you know what? That's something, to be proud of, that we both have learned. But not
Yes.
everybody goes through that. Some people,
No,
it's
no.
harder.
It is. I have no communication at all with my ex, and neither do basically two of the three kids. So it's, yeah, I think when you start dealing with narcissism, and it takes a different toll. So,
Sure,
um,
absolutely.
yeah. So, but my youngest is my daughter, and I have two boys and a girl, and she's married, be a year like in December, and it took her a while, but she didn't want. I'm so blessed in that she did not want to repeat some of my mistakes, and so we've been close and we've talked, and some of the things she said, well, what should I look for, you know and I I said, well, what I would look for now, is how do they act when they're in traffic. I'm in, Southern California, and traffic is an everyday thing,
Right.
like 24/7 basically. How do they act in traffic? Can they kind of let it go with the flow, or do they just have the road rage? How are they in a restaurant when they get a meal served to them that's not to their liking? How do they treat that waiter or waitress? Those are telling things in different situations, and how people react of the type of character that they are. And keep your eyes open, because there's things that we can all go with the flow with. We're not perfect, and it's things that will make us angry, and things that'll make us laugh, and see if those things resonate with who you are and your core values, and keep true to your values.
So when you called your mother that day and she was like, I've been waiting for this call. Um, have you ever asked her, why didn't you know, ask me if I was happy or if everything was okay?
um Well, it's not like they didn't ask, or she's like, "How are you?" and things like that.
Right.
I just was close to the chest. I didn't say anything. Well, basically, I was walking on eggshells. So,
Sure.
at one point in time, very early on, he blew up at me because I had reached out to my mom because I was scared about something, and he said, "No, never to call her, for that." So, those kind of situations, they leave those memories, and they leave their scars. So you become cognizant of what to survive.
Right.
How do you navigate this little path to survive? So, to be fair, I wasn't honest and open. I would just say, yeah, everything's fine, or the kids have the cold this week, or what it's just surface chit chat.
Right.
So, you can kind of play the game. But, later on, when we've had chats, and I said, if you had noticed something, or you were concerned, why didn't you say something? And quite honestly, the response is, we didn't think you would really listen, and, we knew you were head over heels in love, and we just didn't think that you would really
Sure.
listen and take it seriously. And the last thing we wanted was for you to rebel and not have any kind of relationship. So I can see that side
Sure.
too, especially as a mother and with my own kids and stuff. You sometimes
Yep.
walk a fine line.
Well, and I think we all do. And I know uh, my mother was a lot more verbal. My mother would always tell you what she thought. And my parents lived 5 hours away from us. And He never wanted to go up there to visit, but he didn't want me to go alone. Now that I look back at that, that was a red flag. Um, but when we'd go up, he didn't like my family.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he sensed my family didn't really like him.
Mhm.
And my mother would take me shopping for something and she would ask me, is everything okay? And I would, pour my heart out to her. And she'd say, well, you chose your life. If that's what you want, that's what you got to do. And the last time when I called her to tell her it was over, she said, it's going to be tough. And I said, yeah, I know. You know, I'll be lucky if I get child support because both he and his mom, if I ever got upset over anything, it was always, you know what, we can have you locked up. There was
Yeah.
always that threat.
Yeah, or
Um,
you take away your kids, or I'm gonna take away the
right.
kids, yeah. No, there was always some kind of threat, and
And
then
again,
after a while, you realize the threats are
and I
just
and I think him finding the right person and me finding the right person, he's been able to go back and look at that and go, I that was the worst thing I probably could have ever done to you. Um, so I'm lucky in that respect. But so many of you aren't, like you said. Um, so you have 3 children. They sort of saw what you were going through. Obviously, your daughter and you have a good relationship. You were able to talk about it. Do they have a relationship with their dad?
no, only the oldest one has some sort of relationship. They maybe talk just a couple times a year. I think it's mm, become more distant as time goes on. Yeah, like I said earlier, there was parental alienation. When I divorced, my oldest one was 14. The state that we lived in um, said that he could decide which parent
Right.
to choose to live with. He chose his dad, and I knew he would because he was always his dad's favorite. And so he thought, that would be easy road for him. It kind of proved not to be, but and I could have gone back to California at any time. He knew I had that right, to do so. I did not because I wanted to stay close to the oldest one. He was
Right.
still in that house. He was still in that situation. But what happened is he would not, return calls. He would not talk to me during the visit, our scheduled visitation would not, come. And so I knew he was getting messages, my
Sure.
ex was berating me pretty badly. So when it was time for him to go to college, he went away, he moved, and then I came back to California. Um, and for a while it was quiet, and then it was more like annual visits. And at first, and I got the two that stayed with me into family counseling and stuff
Sure.
pretty quickly, usually because I knew I needed to get everybody to heal and move on from this. And because any visitation and stuff, I was constantly being, bad mouthed. I mean, with words that young children should never hear.
Sure.
And so, the psychiatrist at first said, well, they have to have a relationship with their dad and stuff. And I was like, have you listened to anything I said? And so what ended up happening is my ex came into town and kind of barged into her office, no appointment, no nothing. And so she realized, um, what I had been saying, and she said, okay. And then so she tried to work with him and said, you've got to stop bad mouthing their mother. What you're doing is alienating yourself from them, not,
Right.
your goal. If your goal is to alienate her, it's not going to work. And she proved right, because when the kids got old enough, and I'm thinking 18, 19, 20, that's when they finally told their dads, like, I've had enough. We've told you to stop. I've had enough. No, no more contact. So it's heartbreaking because that was never, again, he talked the big talk. Oh, we're going to co-parent. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And it didn't, nothing came to fruition. It was challenging, but, the kids, we've got through it by the
And
grace of God.
And I know there are a lot of people who are listening to this who have been the ones who have been abused, but I'm hoping the abusers are listening to this as well because they they can get the help that they need. Um, I have learned over the years, I know I wear my life on my arm. It's open to anybody, okay? And it works for me that way because if
Yeah,
somebody doesn't like me for something that I believe in or that has happened to me, you know what? They can walk away. That's all right. Um, and maybe someday they'll come back and they'll realize, hey, I understand.
yeah,
But abusers can get help. And I'm hoping that the red flags that we're talking about, you might think it's a cute thing, to say to your wife or your husband, you're too fat or you're ugly or you'll never find anybody else to ever love you or I'm going to turn the kids against you. That does none of us any good.
right.
And as
Not even
abusers,
to the abusers.
oh, absolutely. The
Yeah,
abuser becomes more abusive and often to themselves, like
yeah,
it sounds like happened with your husband and the kids. Um, if he had walked a finer line there, he might still have all of his kids in his life.
yeah.
Um, but one of the reasons I do this show, and I know you have worked with motivation champs, which I think are wonderful. Um, One of the reasons we do these podcasts is so that people can get their story out, have somebody else come along and say, either I've been there, or wow, I used to do that, or how do I prevent that from happening to me? And a lot of us women, we talk about that we're strong, um, but too many of us, because of culture, um, we start believing all the negative things that are said about us,
Mhm.
whether we want to or not. So I know that was difficult for you. So when you made that decision, you know what? This marriage is now over. I'm Catholic. You'll all have to forgive me. Um, and um, I get what you're saying. It's horrible when there's something that you're so bound to, and now you feel like you're being disgraced in another way. But how did you actually either push him out the door or you walk out the door? How did that all come about?
One night we had a what was known as a tuck under garage, and this was in Georgia. So I went downstairs. He would always the basement area that was down there was his office. So one night I went down there and I said, I'm not happy. And he goes, "That's your problem." And I went, You're not hearing me. I'm not happy in this marriage." And that stopped him in his tracks. And he tried to make an effort, but it didn't seem sincere at the end of the day. And there was just more pressure. He was ended up putting more pressure. It's like, see, I did what you asked, isn't this good enough? And again, at that time I was also dealing with, I had gotten pneumonia, I was hospitalized, I was, on antidepressants, and that kind of pressure was spiraling more downhill. And I realized he wasn't getting it. And so when I was in the hospital, I told him, I said, no, this isn't going to work. And so we made arrangements that he was traveling to North Carolina, I believe, quite a bit. So I would stay until I could get out, get better, and find a place to live and stuff. So I eventually left, and he would stay away during those time frames. If he needed to come back to get clothes or whatever, we would arrange where I would be out of the house. So I needed that distance, get some of that distance. And so the last time I was just getting my last things, out. Kind of, he was there, had a confrontation, and he said, you'll never make it, and no one will ever love you. Like,
So, how long has it been from this point to when you actually broke things off and started divorce proceedings?
Um, well, the divorce happened like 25 years ago. So
Okay.
basically after I said that, the divorce proceeding started pretty quickly, within 6 to 9 months, whatever the standard, you go through the protocol, you find the attorneys, you have to come up with the agreement, you have to come up with an agreement of separating the marital property, what debts, who's going to have the house, it took about, I want to say about 9 months, but at that point, we were living in two different locations.
So this is 25 years ago. Society looked at things a lot differently back then than they do today.
Yes.
Um, I know that my ex kept saying to me, I'm going to get custody of our son.
Hmm.
Um, and it was like, no, he didn't. But then about a year after we divorced, maybe a little longer, I met my current husband. Um, and at the time, I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. My current husband was living in Cleveland, where we live now. And I had to petition the court to be able to move with my son. Um, and the court was very giving. It was like, yes, you're willing to let his dad see him, whatever. Um, but it was a terrible period of time because, it was like, well, I'm going to go back and fight someday, which he did. He lost, but we lost a ton of money.
Yeah.
Okay. And the whole concept behind it at that point was, you know, you're a terrible mother. Look where you're living, and all these allegations. And again, I started believing them. And I think it's very sad that you and I, 25 years after all this, we're now free enough to really talk about it, to understand it. Um, but I don't know about you, but even for me, even to this day, every once in a while, I start feeling guilty. What did I do wrong? And I have to shake that off and realize I did nothing wrong. Do you ever feel that way?
I don't feel guilty because I feel good about the decision because I was brought to such a low point. I mean, I was at when you're waking up in the psych ward, you're at bottom. You're at rock bottom. And so but what I I will say is I've not really dated. I've not really had any relationships. I seem to shy away from intimacy in those kind of close personal relationships with men. Um, would I like to? Yes, but I'm not sure I'm there yet, even after all of this time, because I don't ever want to go back to that point. I mean, that's probably a big fear that I have.
So, what you're telling me is you are very in touch with yourself today, where when you married him, you really weren't.
Right.
I'm the same way. Um, and to our listeners out there, um, your life is going to change when you make a decision that
Yes.
you are in the wrong situation. Don't expect to be the same person you were yesterday, uh, but you can be a happier person, but it's going to take time.
It is going to take time. Do I regret that decision? No. I am more confident. I am happier. I have proven to myself that I'm capable of making a life for myself, a life for my kids. For the most part, my kids are happy. I'm happy. Um, life is good, and I have a strong faith. I'm like I said, I was Catholic, so God has been with me, and I know He will continue to be with me. So that having that foundation, that support, has really what's carried me, I think, through, and it's a process. Every day is a new adventure. Every
Absolutely.
day you get into, sometimes there's situations and it's like, is this going to be a trigger for me? And every now and then I've run into those, and that's when I know I'll go back and get, some therapy just for a few sessions and talk it through. And it's like, this is what triggered me, and then we think talk about why, and and go through. So don't be afraid to get the help that you need. There is help out there, even if you're trying to leave a situation. There's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and which is 1-800-799-SAFE. And reach out to them. There's resources within your own communities that can help. Sometimes there's resources in your own church or religious groups that can help. I think the biggest thing is not saying anything. And then that's when you start feeling really alone. And granted, there may be people that might not understand, but there will be somebody that will. So using the resources like the National Domestic Hotline, you're going to get the right people to help you, and they'll tell you about putting plans in place and what you need to do if you decide to leave some of these situations. So if anything, I want to leave the listeners that there is hope. You can have a better life.
Absolutely. So tell us the name of the book and how we can find it and read it and connect to it.
Great. It's called Torched, Burned by a Gaslighter, and it's available on my website, autograph copies, and that's www.brokentoboldness.com. And as of tomorrow, it's going to be live on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Actually, you can pre-order that now today. And so, yeah, 3 ways to get it, and I hope people will read it. And it's not a long novel; it's a pretty quick read, but it's full of some information and just being aware, like I said, of the red flags and you know catch your attention if you're in one of these situations, or learn about it so that you don't find yourself in one of these situations.
Or recognize it in somebody else, which,
Yes. Yeah.
um, you know, I wish back when I was going through it, yes, my parents noticed it, but again, my parents didn't care for him to begin with or his family. And so I sort of took it with a grain of salt. Um, but I had wished my girlfriends had seen it. Um, and the sad part for me was when we broke up, my girlfriends and their husbands sided with him instead of me. I was the crazy one. Um, and that's okay because some of us have mended those bridges
Yeah.
because time has changed.
Well,
So we don't, I want people to know that, like Debbie said, there are resources. So when your core of friends around you can't respond and don't even, know what to do, and a lot of them will walk away because they're afraid. Hey, if it happened to Karen, happened to Debbie, is it going to happen to me? Um, but the resources out there can get you through this, can open things up. On our show notes, I'm going to have all of Debbie's information. You can reach out to her on her website. Um, and don't be alone. Get out there
absolutely.
and, you
You're
know,
not alone. You're not alone.
well, Debbie, it was great getting you on. I know I woke you up really early this morning. You're in California. I'm on East Coast time, but I certainly appreciate it. Um, give our regards to your kids and tell them that, you know, our thoughts are with all of you to continue to heal and have the best life ever.
Thank you so much, Karen. It was a joy to have this conversation with you this morning. And, God bless you and your work that you're doing.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye
Thank you.
now.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.